Hello. Today's book is called Hide and Seek, and it's about 3 children who went on the biggest adventure of their lives. Enjoy. James, his sister Sally, and Mark, their BFF, best friend forever, were bored. They had played all day, but now that it was dark and difficult to see, they had nothing to do. They couldn't play football because they couldn't see the ball. They didn't want to go inside and play a game because it was a beautiful springtime night and they had already spent all winter indoors. They just didn't know what to do and they felt it was a bit too early to go back home. "I guess I'll just go home," said Mark in a very sad voice. "Aw," said James, "we still have a lot of time. We can play a game of something." Then Sally had a great idea. She said, "Oh, I know. Let's play hide and seek." "I was just going to say that," said James. "Yeah, right," said his sister. "You always say you were about to say the same thing I said." "Do not," James said in a loud voice. "Do too," yelled Sally back. Mark just looked down and shook his head side to side and thought, "Here we go again." Then he yelled, "Okay, let's play hide and seek. I'll be the seeker." He turned, faced a big tree, closed his eyes, and started counting out loud. 100, 99, 98, 97, 96. Sally and Mark stopped arguing, looked at each other, and ran in opposite directions to try and find a really good hiding place. In the distance, they could still hear Mark counting. 4, 3, 2, 1. "Ready or not, here I come." He turned and began looking for places where they could be hiding. Finding Sally was easy. She always ran off and then circled back so she could be close to the base, the safe place to get before being tagged. Mark looked for the biggest tree and ran toward it, but she wasn't there. "I'll bet she's behind that big bush," he said to himself. So he ran to it and was ready to tag her, but she wasn't there either. As he turned around, he saw James running towards base and darted after him. Just before he touched James' shoulder, James tagged the base and yelled out, "Safe!" "Did you get Sally yet?" James asked. "No," said Mark. "I haven't been able to find her, and it's getting late. I need to be heading home." So both boys yelled out, "Come on out, Sally, it's late." But there was no reply, even a tiny little sneaker from behind the trees or somewhere in the darkness. They yelled out again, "Come on, Sally, come on out, it's late." Still, there was no reply from Sally. They began to worry and started searching for her. As they walked around the area, they called out, "Sally, come on, we give up, you're safe." But no matter how much they looked and how loudly they called her, there was no reply. She didn't show up. They started to worry. It was as if she had disappeared. Sally was wondering what had happened. All she could remember was crawling under a trunk tree and hiding. Now, as she looked up, she saw several stars through a small hole above her head. She had fallen into a hole when she crawled under the tree trunk. "Help!" she yelled and heard her voice. Her voice echoed throughout what must have been a cave. "Help! Help! Help! Help!" "Did you hear that?" James said excitedly. "Sally just yelled for help." "Keep yelling, Sally!" James screamed. "Keep yelling! That way we can find you." Sally heard her brother and kept screaming. After a short while, the boys were standing next to the falling tree trunk. "Hey, are you stuck under this tree?" asked James. "Kind of," Sally yelled. "When I crawled under it to hide, I fell into a cave. Please help me, I'm scared. It's dark and I can't get out." Mark said, "James, you stay here with Sally and I run home and get my dad." Then he dashed off into the darkness. "Don't be scared," said James. "I'm right here with you." "No, you're not," Sally sobbed. "You're all the way up there and I'm down here." As Sally turned into the darkness of the cave, she bumped into something, screamed, and began to cry. "What's wrong?" James yelled. "There's something down here with me." Just then, Mark and his father came running through the woods. Mark's father knelt down and asked Sally if she was okay. He could hear her crying and sobbing. "Sally, are you hurt?" "No," she said, "but I'm scared and there's something down here with me."
"Stand back, Sally. I'm lowering a rope and I'll be down with you in 1 second.
Mark's father tied the rope to the tree, found the hole under the tree trunk, wiggled a bit, and lowered himself into the cave. Sally could see him coming down and stopped crying. Not only he was there, but the cave became bright.
He reached the floor of the cave. He shone the light on Sally and gave her a big hug. "Don't be frightened," he said. "I'll have you out of here in no time."
Then he shone the light around and saw that she had fallen into a small cave, and very close to her, in the middle of the cave, was something wrapped in layers of old blankets. Wow. "Mark, James, there's something down here. I'm going to tie the rope around it and I want you to pull it out." The boys pulled out the object, untied it, and let the loose end of the rope fall back into the cave. The cave wasn't deep, and Mark's dad boosted Sally over his head so she could crawl out. He then grabbed the rope. "Let's go back to my house for a cup of hot tea. I'll call your parents so they aren't worried, and we'll see what treasure Sally has found," he said.
They got to Mark's house. They sipped their tea and began unwrapping the treasure. They carefully peeled off layers of old blankets and cloth to reveal a wooden box. They slowly opened it and stared in amazement.
"Oh my," Sally said in disbelief. "I don't believe what I'm seeing." The boys and Mark's father just stared. Inside the box were jewels of every color you could imagine. There were diamonds, rubies, sapphires, and intermixed they could see loads of gold coins and strands of pearls. "We're rich," the boy said. "Not quite," interrupted Mark's father. "Someone could have lost this, and I don't think you should plan on." The next day, the four of them and Sally's mother drove to the police station, explained what had happened, and gave the treasure to the police to hold while they conducted their investigation. They left the police station sadly, and even the double-dipped. Several weeks passed with no words from the police. Then, one evening, Mark's father called James, Sally, and their parents. "The police just called, and I think you should come over right now," he said. "I'm afraid there is..." Sally and James didn't say much during the ride to Mark's house. Sally thought that since it was bad news, the treasure belonged to someone else, even though they probably lost it. "Whatever happened to Finders Keepers?" she mumbled. "What did you say, Sally?" When they arrived at Mark's house, the police were there with the treasure box. As Sally entered, the captain introduced himself and said, "Sally, this is yours. Your parents need to sign some papers, but the box and its contents are yours." Sally, Mark, and James shrieked with joy and danced around the room. Then Sally said, "What's the bad news?" The captain smiled and said, "The treasure is worth more money than you can imagine, and with your newfound wealth comes great responsibility." Mark asked, "Are you going to share?" "Of course," Sally said. "If you and James didn't help me, I might still be there." Several days later, Sally asked everyone over to her house. "I have decided what to do with the money from the treasure." "No, there's not," said Sally. "Is too," James said. "Is not," Sally said in an angry voice. Just as Mark was going to say, "Here we go again," Sally said. "This is why there isn't an extra 1/6. I'm giving it to the local charity so it can be given to those less fortunate and in need." Her mother and father said it was a caring and responsible thing to do. They were very proud of her and knew that she understood what the captain meant when he had turned the treasure over to her just days before. What would you have done if you had found the treasure?